Get Out is a movie that I absolutely love. I studied it pretty extensively last fall because I wanted to use it as an example for a free class I was teaching here on YouTube. It's a movie that has a typical 3-act structure in one of the most popular and reliable genres there is, and yet it's so original and its quality was so exceptional that it won the Oscar for Best Screenplay.
Thank you. I love you all. Thank you so much. Good night.
And also, it was nominated for Best Actor, Best Director, and Best Picture. So while I was studying it, I noticed a number of changes from the script to the movie, some of them kind of subtle, but that I felt had a pretty significant impact in terms of how the movie played. So I thought it'd be cool to dig into 4 of those here, see whether they made the movie better or worse, and see what we can learn from them as writers and filmmakers. Obviously, there are many drafts of a screenplay, starting with when it's first written all the way through production. The draft I read is pretty close to the finished movie, but it doesn't have scene numbers, so it's definitely not a shooting script that was used for production. There are also enough changes between it and the movie that it doesn't seem like the one that was put together for the Oscars either. Unfortunately, there's no date, so I can't really say for sure when it was written, but because it's available for free online, what I can do is put a link to it right in the description below. And so I have. As of this recording, you can stream Get Out on both Amazon Prime and on Peacock. So if you have either of those, you can actually just have the movie open in one tab, the script open in another, and you can refer back to them as we go. Or you can just watch the video, whatever works for you. I don't really care, but either way, let's get into it. Okay, so the changes begin right away. The opening scenes both have a lot in common, but the one in the script actually is a lot longer, has more going on, and is therefore more layered. It also begins with a Bible verse on the screen, which does not appear in the movie. It then moves to this nighttime exterior shot of this perfect suburban house where this white family is sitting inside. We're watching them through the window. They're eating dinner and they're having this conversation about their upcoming trip to Disney. The kids talk about how Mickey isn't really Mickey. There's a person inside of Mickey who is playing Mickey, and that is actually pretty cool foreshadowing for what's about to come. As this is going on, Andre, who is in both the script and the movie, is jogging down the street and he sets off a motion light in front of the house. There's this great moment of tension as the family spots him outside and the dad gets up out of his chair as the mom squirms in her own chair, and then Andre moves on and the family goes on and continues to have their conversation about Mickey. But then this car pulls up alongside Andre with its windows blacked out and it starts rolling alongside of him. Andre at first tries to make it clear that he's not a threat, that he just moved to the neighborhood, but the car just continues to roll right alongside of him. It becomes threatening enough that Andre eventually loses his cool, shouts at the driver, and invites him to get outside of his car and fight. The driver then rolls down his window and reveals himself to be wearing this medieval knight's helmet, and then he raises a gun and shoots Andre with a dart. Then he brings him around to the back of his car and puts him in the trunk. It's a very cool, very well written, very layered opening scene. In the movie, we get a way more efficient version of the same thing. The family has disappeared entirely, and now Andre is no longer jogging, but instead he's walking down the same street trying to follow these really confusing directions. And then the car passes him, and then it turns around and follows him. The driver gets out wearing his knight helmet, he attacks Andre, and he throws him in the back of his trunk. If I had to guess, the script for this opening was probably 3 to 3.5 pages shorter. The opening as it stands in the movie is still great. It's clean and it gets us right into things while still really doing a great job of establishing both the tone and the genre. That medieval knight's helmet was enough to tell us that there was something kind of unique and special about this movie, not to mention the music that played as soon as Andre got put in the car. And also, Andre is not the protagonist of the movie, and this opening gets us to our protagonist much, much faster. And if I had to guess, that was one of the main reasons that they switched things up here. It's also the reason that I personally think this is probably the better opening. I would kind of love to see the original opening just because I think it's such a well-written scene and I think Jordan Peele probably would have directed it so well. But it does kind of make you think that Andre is going to be the protagonist for a few minutes, and then the audience kind of has to do the mental work of getting on board with a new central character several minutes into the movie. It worked in Scream, it worked in other movies, but it's a really tricky thing to pull off. So let's talk about the second change. If you've watched my channel regularly at all, you know that one of the things that I talk about all the time is the importance of an active protagonist. It is especially important that the protagonist makes a decision to move into Act 2 and pursue whatever it is that their goal might be. Get Out has kind of a challenge here because Chris's goal is kind of a soft one. Basically, he wants to convince his girlfriend Rose's family to like him. In a novel or something where you can get inside a character's head, this is much easier to do, but how do you show an active decision that represents that choice on screen? I think the script does something really smart here at the moment when Chris enters the family's house. First of all, we get just a little bit of a setup to make things weird and kind of creepy and awkward as they drive up to it. It's a long driveway and we see Walter, the black groundskeeper, and there's just something kind of off about him. So now when Chris makes his decision, there's just a little bit more weight behind it. Then we get to the front porch where Rose's parents meet them outside, and Dean, Rose's dad, pulls Chris in for a hug and tells him that they're huggers. Missy, her mom, comments on how handsome he is and feels his biceps, so there's like a little bit of invasion of personal space there. Okay, but what is Chris actually going to do? He's on the front porch of his girlfriend's parents' house. He's not going to turn around now and go home. Missy is literally inviting him inside, and the decision has already been made for him, right? So this is where I think Jordan Peele played it really well on the page. Rose tells her parents that they're embarrassing him, but then Chris says, before he takes Missy up on her invitation to go inside, "I'm fine with embarrassing, by the way. Go ahead." Chris has essentially submitted to this household. He has chosen to let them treat him how they want to treat him in order to get them to like him. It is subtle, but it's also an active decision that sets up everything that's about to come, and it meshes with the movie's themes beautifully. This is on page 18, and on page 19, we have moved inside the house. Chris is getting a tour, and it feels like we are distinctly into Act 2. 18 or 19 pages is a little bit early, but it's not outside the realm of normal, especially not for a horror movie. But the movie does things differently. We get to Dean and Missy's house at 13 minutes in, when the movie would have had us there more like the 18 to 20 minute mark. 13 minutes would feel early to step into Act 2, and in some ways, this now feels like the movie's inciting incident. Inciting incidents are not typically a choice that the protagonist makes, but are instead something that happens to them that drastically changes their situation. In the movie, the scene on the front porch is filmed from far away. It's unsettling, and it works great as we barely hear the dialogue between Chris and Rose's family. The line I mentioned, the line that represents his active decision, isn't there at all. They just go right inside. That critical point where the protagonist has made a decision to move into Act 2 has completely disappeared. But here's the thing, and I assume it's because he knew that his protagonist needed to have this moment. Jordan Peele wrote a new scene that represented it. There's a scene in the movie that's not in the script that's at like the 27 to 28 minute mark. It's nighttime, Chris and Rose have just spent the afternoon at the house, and Chris has experienced some very subtle racism. It's been weird. Chris and Rose are in her bedroom, and Rose is apologizing for everything that's happened, and Chris is saying, "Well, I told you so," but then he reaffirms his decision to stay because he loves her. He cares that much about her that he wants her family to like him, and so he's going to continue to let them treat him this way. He turns off the lights, he goes to sleep, and once again, Chris has made a choice. And now we are in what is basically Act 2 of the movie. So I have no way of knowing why that change was made. My guess is that it was a studio note. In the age of shorter attention spans, maybe they just wanted to get to the house faster, so they wanted to move that moment up to the inciting incident. And because of the new scene that Jordan Peele wrote, it totally works. And it does feel unsettling when they get to the house because of the way that he shot it. Me personally, I like the version in the script a little bit better. There is just something that feels right about Act 2 beginning with Chris walking into this entirely new location, this new house, this big mansion where he's getting a tour, and everything just feels so new and weird. But again, both ways work really well. And obviously the movie was a massive success, so if they did make that decision to cater to shorter attention spans, who's to say that that wasn't part of the reason why it worked so well? Anyway, on to the third change. In the movie, toward the end, when Chris escapes the game room, he does it by killing Jeremy. He then kills Dean and Missy along the way as he escapes the house, and he uses the flash on his phone to like snap Walter out of his daze, and then Walter uses the gun to shoot Rose. But Rose doesn't quite die, so Chris has to finish her off, and he goes to try and strangle her, but he can't do it. Chris has definitely changed as a result of this movie, but he hasn't lost every last shred of his humanity. He can't bring himself to end his ex-girlfriend's life with his bare hands, no matter how evil she turned out to be. In the script, the beats are very similar, but instead, Chris kills Rose as he escapes the game room, so she is out of the picture right at the beginning of that final climactic sequence. He then kills Dean and Missy, and he does the flash thing with Walter, and Walter shoots Jeremy. Jeremy is the one who turns out to be not quite dead this time, so Chris takes the butt of the gun, and he smashes Jeremy's face in and bludgeons him to death. I think they made an excellent decision by making this change. The emotions play much higher with having the final confrontation be with Rose, because Rose is kind of the true antagonist here. Also, it gives us just like a little bit of hope for Chris's ability to heal from this experience, because he can't quite bring himself to kill her. And what's funny is, in terms of scripting, it's not like they had to change very many words. They basically swapped names, tweaked a little bit of dialogue, and like changed up a few action lines toward the end of the sequence. But the emotional impact is that much higher. Which brings us to the fourth and final change, the ending. In the script, if you go to the end of like page 97, instead of Rod arriving in the cop car to save Chris gets swarmed by actual cops. And then we cut to the next scene where Rod comes to meet him in jail. Rod is trying to get names and information out of Chris to see if he can help prove his innocence, but Chris can't really remember anything. But weirdly, Chris seems kind of okay with maybe being in prison for the rest of his life because at the end of the day, he stopped them. In the movie, it's much simpler. Instead of cops, it's Rod who shows up in the cop car. Rose was all excited when she saw those flashing lights because she thought the cops would probably assume Chris was the guilty one and they would come and save her. But when she sees Rod, she realizes it's game over. Chris goes with Rod and very literally moves on, and we watch the light fade from Rose's eyes. And so she still dies. She still gets her comeuppance, and sure, like in some way, because Chris could have probably tried to save her, maybe he's sort of responsible for her death, but it doesn't have the same feeling that it would have if he had actually strangled the life out of her. Instead, it very much feels like a distinctly up ending. So, which ending is better? I think the script ending works. And what's interesting is they did actually shoot it, and you can find it on YouTube if you want to go see it and check it out. That ending does a great job of resonating with the movie's themes, and it's not like Chris loses entirely. It's kind of like a half win. And if they'd gone with this ending, I still think it would have been a great movie. But the thing is, I think one of the strongest themes of the movie is like the danger of letting someone else dictate who you are and how they treat you. And so it just feels so satisfying to let Chris win. And in my opinion, I think that makes the movie's ending the better one. And because we as audiences tend to care more about how the ending makes us feel than any other part of the movie, I think there is a very real chance that the decision to go with this ending is part of why the movie was such a massive success. So listen, I don't know who made the decisions about these 4 changes. It might have been Jordan Peele. It might have been another producer. It might have been a studio executive. But overall, I think it is a wonderful example of when the process of development works for the better. It doesn't always happen that way. Many times you start out with a great script and then you wind up with kind of a mediocre movie because you just have so many people involved who have their own opinions and ideas, and it gets kind of messy and murky along the way. But in Get Out's case, I think it worked really, really well, and I think it's important to celebrate when the process works the way it's supposed to. So, do you agree? Do you disagree? Which ending do you think is better? What about the other changes? Let me know in the comments. I would love to hear from you, and I will see you next time.